I think the more I learn about Brock Purdy, the more I absolutely adore him. And there was some information that we got, during this pre-draft process. And I specified pre-draft process because I'm saying it was after the season, right? And it kind of gave me a new context for how special Brock Purdy is, because he didn't really miss any time at all, coming off a major surgery. Everybody's actually shocked that he was ready to go by the start of the year. Mm-hmm. And yeah, there were some shaky games in the early to middle part of the year, but everybody was just surprised he was even playing. It's like, oh my God, how is he on the field, let alone coming on strong down the home stretch in such a way that people were considering him as a legit MVP candidate, even over CMC. I'm not saying I held those views, but I'm saying it was a popular narrative that Brock should have been, right up there at the top of the MVP voting. If you're looking at the season that he had, he crushed like every advanced metric you could possibly crush, right? On the way to the Super Bowl. But when I say the more I learn about Brock, the more impressed I am with him, it was this information that we got in the offseason that he was actually rehabbing through November. He was not healthy to start the year. He wasn't even healthy halfway through the year. He wasn't done with rehab until basically Thanksgiving. And he was still playing at a really, really, really high level. And then, of course, down the home stretch in the back, 6 weeks of the season through the playoffs, he just completely took off when he was healthy. But the fact that he did all that without being healthy for most of the regular season, like, this guy's just not normal. This is not just oh man, they found a hidden gem in the 7th round, or oh man, it's Mr. Irrelevant, he's getting playing time, he's starting, look how plucky he is. This is a legitimate top, not even 12, maybe not even 10. This might be a legitimate top 8 quarterback in the league that had that impressive of a year, not even healthy. The more I learn about Brock Purdy, the more I think that this guy is for real. And in a couple years, he's going to be, probably a $58, $59 million quarterback, and he's going to earn every single penny.
One of the biggest disappearing stories of last season, period. In the preseason, that's all we heard is, man, I don't know who they're going to start. And it was very likely they were going to start somebody else, at least for the first month, possibly. People were saying bleeding into 6 or 8 weeks. We're getting into half the season now. Brock says, nope, comes out, plays the very first game. And literally that balloon popped. That story went away. But it didn't go away. It was still going on behind the scenes. He was still rehabbing. He was still playing at a very high level, even if he was physically limited. Never said anything about it. He said, no, I'm fine. Level's good. I'm here. And it just went away. Mm-hmm. It was like a whisper. It just disappeared. But it was still there. And the fact that he drove through all that, he shares a trait with all the great ones, which is that hardcore iron competitiveness.
And a workaholic, for sure.
Not giving anybody, including himself, an inch. And at the same time, on the top, smooth as silk. Nope, got it. It's not a problem. It's not something I'm going to blame any performance on. I'm good. I'm solid. I'm here. I'm fine. I'm not telling you anything. And I'm going to work my ass off. And I'm going to get to the end of the season, and I'm going to go on a full terror run through the end of the playoffs and get to the Super Bowl. Again, when I'm healthy. It was such a big drumbeat in the preseason, and then it just vanished because he made it vanish.
I think, as odd as this is to say, he's one of the most underrated players in the league. Not just quarterbacks, but underrated players. Doesn't mean he doesn't have some limitations. Physically, yes, he's not as gifted as some of the top 5 quarterbacks that you're going to see, whether it's Mahomes, Allen, Lamar. I would even say from a tools perspective, Stroud has better tools than him. Mm-hmm. But if you're just looking at who plays the position better than Brock, I don't think you can really get more than 7 or 8 names deep before you have to say Brock Purdy. And we're going to get into a lot of the analytics and especially when we get into the scheme information about how much they put on him, even while he was rehabbing. This was not a Mickey Mouse offense of it's super play action heavy or it's dinks and dunks. No, folks, he was doing everything. And he was asked to do a lot more than a lot of other quarterbacks around the league that people popularly rank ahead of him. Like, this is not a joke. Like, this is not a Mickey Mouse offense. It's not just Brock Purdy surrounded by elite talent. Believe me, there was some talent issues in front of Brock Purdy last year. He was just that good that he was kind of the great equalizer for a lot of it. So if you're a Niners fan, sit down, grab a drink. We have a long episode ahead. We're going to talk about everything great about your team, some areas that maybe weren't so great that ideally improve this offseason, and of course, we're going to pick a winner for the upcoming NFC West. So, big show today. Hope you guys enjoy it. And with that, Jay, Autumn, Anthony, roll the intro. Welcome back to the Bootleg Football Podcast. I'm Brett. That's EJ. Talking Niners today. Fascinating team. I will admit that I did underrate them last year. I'm going to raise my hand and say I'm the dumbass that had the Seahawks winning the division. Not that the Seahawks were a bad team last year. In fact, they were dead-ass average. I think they had like the 16th overall pick in the first round. But I definitely underrated the Niners going into last year. There were some concerns I had that were validated, but the fact that Brock Purdy is so good that he wiped away those concerns is why we're sitting here talking about them today. Is, again, legitimate Super Bowl contenders. Some would say Super Bowl favorites. At the very minimum, NFC favorites. So I'm not going to make the same mistake again this year. Like, when it comes to the Niners, they were great last year. They're still great this year. Might be even better.
They have and I know this will anger some people, a Chiefs-like status at this point in terms of just not going to bet against Kyle and John Lynch and that organization and what they've put together, just based over recent NFL history. Like, if you look back over the last 3 seasons, what this team, what this organization has accomplished is beyond impressive. And really consistent. Again, lots of things have changed about all those teams and their approach and everything else. The results have been largely the same.
Speaking of the Chiefs, they're about to go through a decision that the Chiefs had to make a few years ago themselves.
Yes.
Do we pay the receiver or not? The Chiefs were up against it cap-wise. They could have technically made it work, but they decided, okay, we have Patrick Mahomes. As long as we have Patrick Mahomes, our window's open. We have Andy Reid. As long as we have Andy Reid, our window's open. Let's not throw away the 2024 Chiefs in favor of the 2022 Chiefs.
Right. And
let's build a sustainable financial model, for lack of a better
term. Let's
term.
take all that money that we would put towards the very expensive, very talented wide receiver and spread it around over like 5 or 6 different positions. Let's build a young, fire-breathing defense to give Spagnuolo to put just the screws to opposing offenses, and then Pat will do his thing. And that's the balance we're going to build. So instead of putting it in one place, we're going to put it in multiple places and diversify for the future, go young. They got through that incredibly quickly. It was almost a non-bump for Kansas City, which is a huge achievement in itself. San Francisco now faces a very similar choice. What do we want to do? Which basket do we want to put our eggs in? And how are we going to move forward again 2 years from now?
I mean, I kind of want to talk about it later in the show, but we might as well talk about it now since we're on the topic. Let's just address the Brandon Aiyuk thing, right? I put out a tweet a couple weeks ago that got a lot of pushback from Niners fans of like, I don't think the deal's going to get done at the number that Aiyuk wants. I think there was a number that it could have worked for both sides a few months ago, but the receiver market completely took off. You know, in February, we were hearing that top of the market was going to be 32.5, ended up being 35. So that translated to everybody else too. And the teams that did it early, like the Colts with Pittman, the Texans with Nico Collins, I don't want to say they got discounts, but they kind of felt that it was going to jump higher than people thought. So they're like, okay, we're going to lock this down. And especially the Texans with Nico, it's like, you're going to give us a little bit of a discount at $24 million relative to the production you're coming off of. You're a legit number one. We know you're going to have crazy production the next few years because we got CJ Stroud. So you're going to give us a little bit of a discount up front. In exchange, we're going to give you a 3-year deal instead of a 4-year deal so you can hit the market earlier and then cash in, which by the time that deal is up,
Yep.
35 is going to turn into 36 and 37 and 38 at the top of the market whenever Jamar Chase or Marvin Harrison Jr. or whoever is signing their next big extensions. So the Niners didn't do that. And I firmly believe, just based on how Aiyuk was talking, like, the number that existed that was fair for both parties is not the number that exists now.
No.
And there's been a hang up. And so when I said I don't think the deal's going to get done, it wasn't because the math isn't mathing. And, I had a little bit of a back and forth with David Lombardi about this, who's an excellent Niners writer for The Athletic. It's not that they can't theoretically do it. Like, obviously, they're going to have to say goodbye to Debo if that happens. Like, there's no way both of these guys are on the same team past this season. They're going to have to say goodbye to Debo, but they're also going to have to say goodbye to other guys too. You're trading a lot for keeping Aiyuk on the roster, because the cap situation in 2025 isn't the problem. It's the cap situation in 2026 and beyond. Like, things get really, really, really tight, and it's not a guarantee that you're going to keep seeing the cap go up by 7 to 10%. You can hope for 7, or rather hope for 10, but expect 7. It's not a guarantee it's going to keep going up that way over and over and over again. And I'm not convinced that the Niners are comfortable, again, throwing away their 2026 and 2027 depth just for Brandon Aiyuk. And I love Brandon Aiyuk. He's one of the best receivers in the league. But the Chiefs made that decision as well with a receiver who's even better than Brandon Aiyuk, because the Chiefs' mentality was, we have the guy at quarterback. Mm-hmm. And if we have the guy at quarterback, we can trust him to make it work. I kind of feel like Kyle Shanahan feels the same way about Brock, of like, hey, I love Aiyuk, but like, I'm not going to compromise our ability to maintain offensive line depth. I'm not going to compromise our ability to play good defense for Brandon Aiyuk when I know that Brock can make it work with Ricky Pearsall and whoever else they draft, in the next year or so. I see what the Chiefs did, and I see what the Niners, I think, are going to do, and there's a lot of parallels to it. It's not that I don't think Brandon Aiyuk is worth the money. He absolutely is worth the money. I just think if you're looking at how all these void years are slamming home in the next couple years, I don't know if they can really afford to be that reckless about it and give up a lot of their depth to make that deal work.
It's not that they can't. I think that's the point that you're making. You can make the numbers work in the NFL that you want to. It's whether or not they should.
Yes, and they're different conversations.
Totally different, because people will say they can afford it. Yeah, technically they can afford it. I feel like we're recycling a lot of the very same narratives we went through with T. Higgins.
Yeah.
Hey, you can't possibly have both of these guys at the top of the market, and all the Bengals fans saying, but they can. They're gonna. They did. Well, it's true. They did in a way, and it's not that they couldn't. But again, the choice isn't for now. In some ways it is. Are we going to make our one push for the Super Bowl all loaded up? Are we gonna push this decision out one more year? Or are we going to make a long-term decision for the team 2 years from now, not 1 year from now? And so a lot of these decisions, and we're going to keep hearing these because the wide receiver market is so inflated. It is one of the most important positions. It has ascended to that top 5 positions in the NFL in terms of impact of the product on the field. And there's also an incredibly strong draft pool. So you see teams like the Niners saying, can we get 80 or 85% of what we get from Brandon Aiyuk out of a rookie that costs $2 million a year?
Yeah.
Or less. And their answer more and more is, yeah, we think we can. And then we get cost-controlled labor for the next 4 to 5 years. And then we do it again because the pool isn't going away. I'm not afraid of our ability to go get replacements and build them up. Are they going to be as good as Brandon Aiyuk right out of the gate? No, but Brandon Aiyuk wasn't really good right out of the gate.
He was a late first-round pick. They got him really late.
And the other part of the Aiyuk story, and this is the one that really gets me as someone that's fascinated by the stories within the NFL, I'm not sure we've ever seen a guy have the arc of early career doghouse that Brandon Aiyuk had. Like, that guy was in the doghouse for the first 2 years. Like, in San Francisco, they were very hard on him because they said, you need to do it a certain way, and you're not doing it that way. And we're not just going to play you because you're a high round pick. We're going to go away from you. We're going to prioritize other people. And when you understand and come to it and come to the system and do it the way we want it done, then you'll see the results. And he did. Like, he did it and he won. And now we're talking about him being potentially one of the highest paid receivers in the NFL. That swing from guy that spent a significant amount of time in Shanahan's doghouse over his first 2 seasons to possibly being one of the top 5 highest paid wide receivers in the league is a great story arc.
And he's a great player.
Yes.
A great dude. I've always been a Brandon Aiyuk truther. You guys know that. If you're deep into the Coleman lore, where a few years ago I said, oh, yeah, you should definitely draft Aiyuk over Debo. And then that was the Aiyuk doghouse year where Kyle was like, I don't acknowledge you exist. So, got some egg on my face for that one. But I believed in the talent. I believed in the skill set. And eventually took a couple years. But, that paid off after everybody lost their fantasy leagues because of me.
Never wrong, just early.
Never wrong, just early. Especially with Aiyuk, very early. Deshaun Kaiser's going to be great any day now. So I've always been an Aiyuk truther, but I also have to acknowledge the reality that Kyle Shanahan has built 3 different Super Bowl caliber offenses in the last 10 years that were all entirely different from each other across multiple teams.
Yep.
If you're looking at Atlanta, the first San Francisco run that they had, where unfortunately they lost to the Chiefs, and the second run that they just had, where unfortunately they lost to the Chiefs. I don't worry about Kyle's ability to build a Super Bowl caliber offense.
Nope.
Aiyuk or no Aiyuk. He's done it before. He'll do it again. The key is having a quarterback that he can trust, like Brock. It's probably the best quarterback he's had since Matt Ryan won MVP with him back in 2016. And yes, Julio was a big factor in that offense. You look at the work he did in Washington. Pierre Garçon was a legitimate number 1. You look at the work he did in Houston. They had Andre Johnson. There's always been that guy there. But I also feel like Kyle is good enough as a former receiver himself at scouting receivers that he can find that type of guy without completely without jettisoning a lot of other key pieces to do it.
I would say compromising.
Yes, that's a better word. I don't know. I feel like if you have Kyle and you have Brock, that's the most important part. So don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Is that coming across?
It is, and we forget also that he looked for a long time for Brock. The list of quarterbacks he's worked with in San Francisco who were good but not good enough, he was always looking for something more. It's why they drafted Trey Lance. He wanted what he didn't have. And it took until he got to Brock. And once he got to Brock, he's like, no, now I've got what I want. And that leads to a lot of talk of Brock about him being a system quarterback, which is all quarterbacks are system
Brock
quarterbacks.
Brock is the system. That's right. The point.
The tone out of the San Francisco organization since early on in Brock's playing career has been, nope, we're good. And nobody believed him because, again, this has been the sort of constant, that was the joke, right? That Kyle was just going to keep looking because Kyle was just going to keep looking. He's going to keep looking until he found Brock. And he stopped looking, and they said that, and nobody believed him. Nobody, not even us. And they found what they're looking for in that system. Like, Brock is that system. Brock runs that system exactly the way that Kyle wants it run. Like, that mesh between quarterback and coach is as strong as any in the league, and I think a lot of people overlook that.
You could argue, looking at late 2000s Matt Schaub, looking at, Kirk and RG3, looking at even Matt Ryan. I'm not sure I've ever seen somebody run this offense better than Brock Purdy. And that's why they're going to be okay. Like, no matter what happens with Brandon, I want Brandon to get his money. I'm still not convinced it's going to be in San Francisco, which, again, we're recording this, July 8th. By the time this comes out, maybe there will be movement one way or the other.
Oh, he's going to get his money.
He'll get his money. I'm not convinced it'll be there, but no matter what happens with it, whether he's a Niner or not, the Niners are going to be good offensively because of their quarterback and because of their coach. God willing, the offensive line stays healthy, because that's the one issue. But yeah, I don't know. I think that's my overall point is they're fine.
Yep.
Just summarize in 2 words. They're fine.
Brandon's going to get his money. San Francisco will be fine. Might not be together. Both of those things are still true.
Before we get into the rest of the show, by the way, recapping everything that went right and wrong with 2023, as well as moving on to the 2024 offseason and all the moves they've made since then. Speaking of Brock Purdy, I do want to bring up our friends over at Underdog Fantasy, who are running season-long pick'ems right now. You don't have to wait till the first Sunday of the season to do pick'ems. You can do them right now, because Brock Purdy, I still can't believe this is the real number, higher or lower 3,900 passing yards. Talk about the disrespect. Underdog, I love you, but guys, that number it's a little bit ridiculous. He threw for like 4,300 last year while injured. He's also at, 28.5 passing TDs. He hit over 30 while injured. So for me, yeah, I'm going to go higher on that. But if you guys are into season-long pick'ems, that is available for you. You can check out Underdog at the link in the description or the QR code on the screen. They have season-longs for every single NFL team, so you can package that with whoever. They've got Brandon Aiyuk. They've got Debo. They've got CMC. They've got Kittle. Pretty much all the Niners have numbers up right now. So again, thank you to Underdog for sponsoring this whole series and making this whole thing possible. Thank you for giving us criminally low numbers to go higher on. We appreciate the free money. And with that, EJ, please walk us through 2023.
2023 for a lot of teams in this series is not happy ground. For the Niners, only the very last bit is not happy ground. This was a tremendous series, a tremendous season. One of the best seasons the Niners have put together. And I know many Super Bowls in that organization, so people are always going to say it fell short if they don't get the ring. Look, this team is 12-5, won their division, 5-3 at home. I love this, 7-2 on the road. The Niners were legit road assassins. Even really good teams in the NFL a lot of times go very close to 500 on the road, and that's good enough to propel them to all those things. Division wins first. The Niners were 7-2. If the Niners are coming to your house, like, batten down the hatches. It was going to be a rough Sunday for you. In the last 5 games, they were 3-2. So tremendous results over the season, propels them to the NFC Championship, the Super Bowl. They, run into Patrick Mahomes, give him a game. Back to what you said about Brock at the top and people underrating him. I go right to this sort of effectiveness on the field and what his peers, the people that play against him, say. And when Steve Spagnuolo, who's one of the best defensive coordinators ever in the NFL, says, no, that guy was wrecking us in the first half. We had to shift what we were doing because Brock Purdy was putting the screws to us in the first half. That's good enough for me as an NFL endorsement. Like, one of the best ever DC says, that guy forced me to change. He's really good as a quarterback.
If you're looking at how Spags handled Jalen Hurts the year before that, which, they did have a lot of problems with Jalen Hurts because Jalen's Jalen, and the mobility caused them a lot of issues. But you compare how he handled Jalen the year before and also how he handled Tom Brady back in 2007, which the NFL was kind enough to send me that tape so that I could compare all 3 of them. And I also got my hands on an old Spags playbook from that Giants era too, so that was fun to look through. But he called games against Tom and Jalen very similarly. Jalen handled it better because the mobility was just an element that he's going to beat you. He's just going to beat you. But it was very blitz heavy, more blitz heavy than people think. Especially back in that old Giants era, where it's like, oh, they just play cover 2 and rush 4. No, they fucking didn't. They blitzed the shit out of Tom Brady, and it worked. Didn't work as well against Jalen. But then you try to blitz Brock a year later, and that's a whole different animal. Like, the Eagles notoriously are terrible at handing blitzes. Brock, you kind of can't blitz him because not only is he super quick on the trigger and very accurate, like, say, Tom Brady, but he's got way more mobility than Brady ever had. So he can still get himself out of trouble like Jalen Hurts He's not as mobile as Jalen, but I would say in like a 10-yard box, he's quicker. So he can get himself out of trouble against pressure either with his legs or with his brain and arm. Mm-hmm. And so he presented an entirely different problem for Spags. And it was a problem that he had a lot of issues solving. To be honest, if that game went on any longer, I'm not convinced that the Chiefs would have won it, but they have one of the only guys who's better than Brock in the league, and Patrick Mahomes, and he kind of ended it right then and there. But like Spags, he's not lying when he said he had issues with Brock Purdy. And now comparing how he handled Brock versus Jalen versus even Tom Brady, I would argue that Brock presented him not the highest difficulty level, because it's Tom Brady. I'm not going to like be that outrageous about it. But as far as who's probably the biggest pain in the ass to game plan against, considering the entire skill set, it's probably Brock. So yeah, he ain't lying.
Very solid system fit. Again, coach, quarterback, mind meld. This is not just a guy that happened into a good situation. Brock Purdy is much, much more than that. It's a great segue into QBS, or quarterback support. One of the numbers we're trying to bring you this season to give you a little bit of nuance about all these numbers from the 49ers and how they achieved their success. QBS is a metric I came up with Arjun Menon, who now works for the Jets. And it is an analytics measurement that takes 5 measurements into account: 3 offensive statistics, a defensive statistic, and 1 from special teams, and basically says, how did a team set the table for their quarterback to play? Regardless of how Brock played, how well were all the things arranged around him so he could have success? It's a 0 to 100 scale. Worst team in the NFL is a 0, best team is 100. On that scale, the Niners were, not surprisingly, a 90.3. That put them 4th out of 32 teams. That might be surprising considering they reached the Super Bowl and they weren't number 1 or number 2. But not surprising if you watch the 49ers on the field. Again, early season to late season, not the same team. Struggled a little bit more early and in the middle of the season specifically. But overall, did an incredibly good job at setting the table for success. The other number is power score, which we introduced to you last year. We take rushing offense, passing offense, rush defense, pass defense, points scored, and points allowed. We just assign them their NFL rank. Where did they finish within the NFL? Everybody wants to be number 1 in these things. The Niners were in a couple of them. Most teams are not number 1 in more than one thing.
I would say 31 teams are not number 1 in any one thing, yeah.
Most teams don't have any number 1 rankings. Very few teams in the league have 2 number 1 rankings out of those 6 numbers. So, Niners, rushing offense, first. Passing offense, also first. That's pretty much it. That's what got them to the Super Bowl. They put so much pressure on opposing teams by scoring points and just being relentless offensively that then you add in what was a very capable defense as well, and other teams couldn't keep up. But on the score of that defense, the rush defense, their league rank was 26th. Now, this is EPA per play against the run. Not typically a super accurate statistic in terms of the 49ers specifically, because yes, teams had success against the 49ers when they ran, but they didn't run very much, and by the time they ran, running wasn't really an option. 49ers scored a touchdown, you score a field goal. They score another touchdown, you score another field goal. We're now halfway through the second quarter. 49ers score another touchdown. They're like, go ahead, run. You might get 4 yards per carry on your 5 attempts for the rest of the game. It's not going to make any difference, folks. We're going to roll over you. So statistically, based on EPA per play, I know 49ers fans are going to be like, our rush defense wasn't 26th. It was in terms of EPA per play. Didn't matter one bit. And as we've highlighted a couple of times in this series, you do not need an elite run defense to win a lot of games. 49ers are poster children for that particular statistic. Pass defense, 6th.
The one that matters. Yeah.
Very, very solid pass defense. Points scored, not surprisingly, with those offensive ranks, they were 3rd. And points allowed as a scoring defense, and again, this matters way more than your rushing defense, they were also 3rd. So 2 1s, 2 3s, a 6th, and a 26th that we just told you doesn't really matter. Overall, the Niners' power score was 6.7, and that put them 3rd overall. So they set the table at the 4th best level. They performed overall at the 3rd best level. None of this was surprising. folks, top to bottom, this is a really good organization at football.
Yeah, if we're just talking about cumulative run defense stats, like they allowed the 5th fewest yards per game, but that's also because they had literally the fewest attempts against them per game, because by the second, third quarter,
folks just didn't try.
It was just over, right? It was just over. So, yeah, I don't know. Take it with a grain of salt. We tend to use EPA just because that, out of all the stats, and none of them are perfect, out of all the stats, we think those cover the most bases, but the Niners are one of those teams where it doesn't cover all the bases, and that's why we got to give that extra context.
And you have to fuel both. This is a great time to say no stat is perfect. Not the ones we use, not the ones your favorite fantasy analysts use. No stat is perfect. All stats are incomplete, and that's why you have to meld it with watching the game, picking up nuance, combining it with film, with situation, and all those things to get a sort of more holistic look at it. It's why football's fascinating, but no number is perfect.
I also have some numbers, by the way, to give context to your numbers. These are scheme numbers where ideally we can paint a picture of how this team played so that you understand how they got to the ranks that they got to. I want to start off by saying I had a little bit of a misconception about this Niners offense in terms of how they ran the ball. I thought they were a little bit more like Sean McVay than they actually are, or Zach Taylor, whichever one you want to throw out. You know, that kind of branch of the tree that has transitioned to being more downhill, you know, gap scheme runs. You could even look at what Stefanski's done in Cleveland, where we're running pin and pull like every other run, you know, and kind of getting away from all the wide zone stuff. I thought that Shanahan, just for me watching games, it felt like they had gone away from wide zone. Turns out, nope, they haven't. Them and Mike McDaniel still run it more than anybody else. 46% of all their runs were wide zones. So they still live in that. Sometimes your eyes lie to you. So I want to correct myself on that. That being said, the passing game is significantly different than past Shanahan offenses. And that's really where you see the impact of Brock Purdy the most, I would say. Because this team does not hold his hand at all in terms of how their passing game is structured. They're pretty low in terms of play action rate. If you compare it to past Niners teams, you go back to 2019, they had the 6th most play action passes in the league when Jimmy Garoppolo was still starting. That's when they went on their first Super Bowl run. They were 19th with Brock. They did not really call a lot of play action. Now, I will say on top of that, because they were not super play action heavy, they did have a fairly low time to throw. They had a top 10 quickest time to throw on average, about 2.7 seconds, which for teams that don't do a lot of the longer developing play action shots, like, yes, their average time to throw is going to be lower. But that doesn't mean that they were a dink and dunk offense. A lot of teams that you see with low average time to throw are not stretching the field. It's a lot of screens. It's a lot of quick, easy layups, and we're going to let our guys do damage with yak. Not to bring up the Chiefs too much in one episode, but like we saw the Chiefs do that a lot. You know, low time to throw, low average depth of target. The Niners, low time to throw, high average depth of target. About the 9th highest average depth, actually, 8.9 yards. So not only was Brock getting the ball out quickly, and not only was he getting it out quickly without having the benefit of play action manipulating the defense, but he was also stretching the field. He was also working the deep intermediate area of the field more and more efficiently than pretty much everybody in the entire league. There was like 4 guys ahead of him in terms of working that area of the field, and that's the hardest area of the field to work. So when I say that they put a lot on Brock's plate, it was, okay, we are not creating throwing lanes for you through hard play action fakes like, say, Slowick did in Houston. We are not giving you an average low depth of target with a bunch of manufactured touches like some other quarterbacks get the benefit of. Everything is on your plate. You're dropping back. You're reading it out. You're using your eyes to manipulate people. You're finding throwing lanes, and you're hitting those throws in very dangerous areas of the field. So when I say Brock Purdy is the system, that's what I mean. They cannot run this passing offense without Brock Purdy. There's very few guys in the NFL that are good enough to run this style of passing game like Brock Purdy can do it. So, yeah, he's a system quarterback. but they can't run this system without him. So as far as I'm concerned, that's probably a top 8 or 9 guy.
And they've run other systems when they've had other quarterbacks. That's your evidence.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't run this system with Jimmy G because they couldn't. It's not because they didn't want to, right? This is the system that Shanahan wanted to run, and he couldn't get there. That's why he kept looking, folks.
I feel like the discourse around this team is so backwards. It's so backwards, right? Because people look at the skill position talent and they look at, Trent Williams, first ballot Hall of Famer, and they're like, oh, anybody could succeed there. No, they fucking couldn't. No, they could not. I'm sorry. They couldn't. You put 20 starting quarterbacks in the NFL on this team and ask them to do what Brock is doing, and it would be a flaming dumpster fire. It just wouldn't work. You think Russell Wilson could do this? Russell Wilson has never run this style of offense in his entire life and had it work. And Russ has a lot of success in his career. He's played for a long time.
But you said intermediate area of the field.
Can't do it. Can't do it.
Not a thing. And look, Kyle's been through how many? 7? 8?
I don't know. What I think I lost track at Sudfeld. That was where I just stopped counting.
There have been multiple bites at this particular apple, and he kept taking bites because he never got to this level. He did other things. He adapted. They still had very good and very effective offenses, but he couldn't do this, and he wanted to do this. He's wanted to do this all along. He got to Brock and said, I can do this now. I can do this confidently. I can put that game on his shoulders and understand the results pretty darn often, because you see quarterbacks come back to the sideline, sit with the head coach. Head coach is like, what were you thinking there? Right or wrong? Right? Why'd you make that call? That mesh between Shanahan and Purdy is more shorthand. They talk less probably than a lot of other quarterbacks because they're just vibing and get it the same way. They see the game the same way. Brock understands what Kyle wants primarily. There's not that, well, I saw this and I thought you wanted it this way, that you saw with all the other quarterbacks. There was a lot of that with Kyle and those quarterbacks. There's very much less of that with Brock, and the results are better.
And it's going to keep being better because now he actually has a full offseason. This is the first real offseason in the NFL that Brock Purdy's ever had, because the year before, he was going through the draft process and everything like that, which is a whole different can of worms. And then last year, he was rehabbing. The first time he's actually been able to just sit back, rehab free, work on his craft, down in Jacksonville with Will Hewlett and Tom Gomerly, and get ready for the season. So, again, I go back to that underdog, 3,900 yards. You sure?
You sure,
are you
folks?
really sure about that? So, yeah, I don't know. I'll take the free money. On the defensive side, I want to – well, this is going to sound like a complete copy-paste from the Texans episode, but, D'Amico's in Houston and running a lot of what the Niners also ran last year. So I'm going to rattle off some numbers that are going to sound very familiar, and it's because they're right next to each other in the rankings for a lot of this stuff. Dead last in blitz rate, bottom 4 in terms of stunt percentage. They have a front 4 that they trust to win. They're not going to do anything fancy. No stunts, no blitzes. Nick, Javon, the other Bosa. Go win. They lost Eric Armstead. They've actually lost a lot of guys in their interior rotation. So we'll see if they keep that up this year. But last year, their front 4 was good enough that they did literally nothing fancy from a pass rush perspective, because they didn't have to. And then in terms of coverage on the back end, is we are starting in a middle field open look, 2 high safeties, and we're going to do one of 3 things. We're going to either stay in it and play quarters, we're going to rotate to 3 weak, or we're going to rotate to 3 strong. One of those safeties is coming down, either the strong safety or the weak safety. And we're playing cover 3 out of it. That was it. That was basically it. If they got into third down, they used cover 1 as a situational call, depending on down and distance, where they didn't want to give space by using zone coverage. But other than that, they played it pretty straight, which is exactly what Houston did as well. So both of these defenses play very similarly. Both of these defenses are also very good at it. I don't anticipate they're going to upset the apple cart too much in 2024 because they still have a lot of high-end talent. And if you have high-end talent, you can get away with being simple because it still works.
Let their guys play fast. Let everybody understand their assignment and focus on execution. I mean, like with a finest point you can. Push as hard as you can on execution. And the Niners have made it work. Again, they've assembled talent. This is a symbiotic relationship between the front office and, we talked about the offensive side. This is the defensive side. What do you need to make that system work? Because this is how we want to play. Well, we need some high-end, like defensive line talent. We also need a very good defensive line coach, foreshadowing to the next session. But we need that. We need secondary players who play, I'm going to say predictably, right? Who understand and play well within that system. There are a lot of system players in the secondary. And San Francisco has recycled those folks. They have cycled through those folks, and multiple different players have played those roles very effectively, whether it was under D'Amico or whether it was last year. The San Francisco secondary, you see very few breakdowns in.
Mm-hmm.
Like very few pointed fingers of, I thought that was your guy. I thought that was your guy. No, again, simple roles and execute the hell out of it. Again, we're not trying to trick you. We have about 4 or 5 things we're going to do here, but we can do it better than you can. And they did, and they have, and that's been a hallmark of their defense.
And they just have great position coaches that get their guys ready every single week, which is probably the best transition we're going to get to our coaching and front office review section. EJ, take it away.
Moment to speak about John Lynch at the top as the GM. He has really come into his own in terms of talent acquisition and keeping this cupboard full. He is ascending to that plane, I think, of threatening the Howie Rosemans of the world, of understanding what his team needs. Yes, they got lucky with Brock. I understand that. I'll hear it in the comments. That's fine. They thought Trey Lance was the answer, and it turned out that Brock was the answer. Does that help an organization tremendously? Yes. Is that all John Lynch has done to keep the cupboard full for this franchise? Not even close. His relationship with Kyle, that understanding of what do you all need to do the things that we want to do, is as strong as any mesh in the league between GM and coach. So John Lynch deserves his flowers. There we go. He got him. Kyle Shanahan entering year 8. We've spoken about him a lot already. Obviously very important to the success of this franchise. Without him, they would not have those offensive ranks. He is at the top of his game, continues to be so, and continues to evolve to stay there. Those are all really good qualities to have in your head coach. Run game coordinator and offensive line coach, Chris Forrester. Shared responsibility with Clint Kubiak last season. Now, presumably, those duties are going to fall to Kyle with help from Clay Kubiak, who we'll get to in a minute.
Another one.
Lots of Ks.
So many Kubiaks in
we
the
got
NFL.
Kyles and Kubiaks and Clays and Clints. Defensive coordinator Nick Sorensen. He was the defensive pass game coordinator and Nichols coach last year with San Francisco, so this is an elevation for him, but he's not coming from the outside. And yes, a lot of the concepts are going to remain similar. The special teams coordinator is Brian Schneider. Notable coaches on offense. Mick Lombardi is this is our ubiquitous title for this entire series, senior offensive assistant. It's his first season with the Niners. Last 2 seasons he spent as the OC of the Raiders. Clay Kubiak, the aforementioned Clay Kubiak, is the offensive pass game specialist. So this is a very important title in a Kyle Shanahan-led team. You have a lot on your plate. A lot of this offense that we've talked about with Brock running it and Kyle calling it, coming down to execution and setting that up week to week, a lot of that's going to fall on Clay Kubiak's plate. Yes, he's Clint's brother. And then Leonard Hankerson is the wide receivers coach on this team. Whenever we have wide receivers who are well regarded in the league and very productive, we are going to talk about the coach. Leonard Hankerson has been that for the 49ers, gets great performances out of his guys. That's why we mention him. The assistant head coach, the new assistant head coach of the 49ers / defense. That's it. That's the general tag, defense.
Nobody knows what it means, but it's provocative.
It's provocative. Is Brandon Staley. Now, Brandon Staley, fresh off his stint with the Chargers, your sweatshirt, the Chargers. Lots of Chargers fans are going to be like, good riddance, fine. I think it's a nod to the respect that both John and Kyle have for Brandon Staley, that they gave him the assistant head coach tag. They just didn't bring him in as the senior defensive assistant or analyst or anything else. They said, no, you're going to be the assistant HC. You're going to be the number 2 on this coaching staff. And yes, we're going to give you the broad title of being able to play with whatever part of the defense you want to. But this was a notable addition for them. It's a bit of a coming home for him. I think it's a very good addition to the staff. I know a lot of Chargers fans are raging against that head coach and defensive coordinator titles, even though this isn't really the coordinator title. Very, very different thing. Brandon Staley is still a very talented coach in this league.
And he's still young. Like, people forget that. Like, he went from John Carroll to head coach in the NFL in, 5 years? Maybe less? Yeah. So, like, he's still pretty early in his coaching journey. I'm willing to give him, the Raheem Morris treatment, although Raheem's situation first time around was not the same because Raheem didn't have a quarterback and Staley had Justin Herbert. But still, like I wouldn't be surprised if, say, 7-8 years from now, Staley continues to work in the NFL as either this title, assistant head coach, or DC's, and he gets another shot at some point. Like I have not given up on Brandon Staley, the head coach. And very often you see guys that get the big job maybe too quickly and don't have enough experience as a coordinator before they get to that level, and it just doesn't go well. Not everybody can be DeMeco Ryans, where like very clearly it goes well immediately. I think Brandon Staley is probably going to get another shot in like 7-8 years or so.
Valuable asset to this team. Chris Kasurik, one of our favorite position coaches in the NFL because of his results. And he's so good at what he does that he has become the basis or the root of a joke, which is which defensive linemen from around the NFL are the 49ers going to pick up in free agency and completely rehabilitate so he can go out and make $1 million from his next team. Like, that's Chris Kasurik in a nutshell.
This year it's Malik Collins, by the way.
But you go back every year and there's one. The reason it's a joke is because it's true. Like, all humor is based in fact. Chris Kasurik is so good at teaching defensive linemen to do their jobs. And the team has relied on it. We talked about the pass rush being a staple of what they do defensively. They couldn't do that without Chris Kasurik both developing their own rookies and reclaiming people off the NFL scrap heap and turning them into killers again. So Chris Kasurik, one of the best coaches in the NFL at any job. Johnny Hollins, the linebackers coach. Again, San Francisco's linebackers have been fantastic. Yes, Fred Warner helps with that. Johnny Holland is a guy that's helping mold and guide that unit. 7 seasons with San Francisco, 4 as the linebackers coach. Daniel Bullock's the defensive backs coach. Again, 7 seasons with the team, but this is his first in charge of all the DBs. Has a strong tradition to uphold. We've talked about how well that secondary has played as a unit over the recent history. He has to carry that forward. Spent the last 4 years as the safeties coach, so this is just a widening of his responsibilities. Again, nothing new under the sun in San Francisco. And then KJ Wright is on this staff as a defensive quality control analyst.
I think his first year coaching, right? I don't think he was there last year off the top of my head.
Not sure if it's his first, but early in his coaching career, and Kyle thought enough of playing against him that he said, yeah, come on down.
He is the quintessential Sam edge hybrid linebacker. That kind of like Kyle Van Noy, Andrew Van Ginkel, all the Vans. KJ Wright, in terms of that mold of player, of hybrid off-ball / on-ball outside linebacker, he's it. And that type of role, like, he had to do so much. He had to rush the passer, he had to drop into coverage. Based on certain looks, like, he would line up as essentially a Mike linebacker and have to stop the run, just like Bobby would have to stop the run as a Mike. And I think getting that kind of experience doing everything is going to really, really help him as a coach, because he can teach everything because he's done it all.
Great addition. Interesting staff, very experienced staff. A lot of continuity here. Not very much movement, which is lucky, quite frankly, for a team as successful as the 49ers to not get ravaged, just poached by the rest of the league every year, is a real benefit to them. And it gives them continuity going into the next season that not a lot's going to change and not a lot needed to change. Again, this is a very successful organization.
Well, given all that and everything we've talked about so far, schemes and coaches and players, oh my, I do want to get to the underdog top three. And this is kind of an interesting discussion around value, because there are some guys that I think are actually not even some. I think pretty much everybody on this team is appropriately valued. Almost everybody, I should say. But the problem is they're so appropriately valued that they're all expensive.
Yes.
And so it's hard to find a true value, like somebody that you're getting way down the board that could theoretically outperform that and be like a league winner, type pickup. I don't necessarily think you're going to get that with the Niners because they're a high-profile team. Everybody knows they score a lot. They're going to get drafted appropriately. Like Aiyuk is at wide receiver 12 and Debo's at wide receiver 16. So no discounts here. That being said, we still have to come up with three. So we're going to start with Ricky Pearsall, who's going at wide receiver 67. Why is this a value? Is he going to be on the field ahead of either of those two guys ahead of him, or even any of the 3 or 4 guys ahead of him? I'm not sure. But I do know this. The concept of a handcuff still exists in fantasy football, mostly for running backs. I think Pearsall is the perfect handcuff receiver for Brandon Aiyuk and or Debo Samuel. I'm not wishing injury on anybody. I'm not even expecting injury. What I am saying is wide receiver 67 is going super duper duper late. And at that point, you're basically just drafting handcuffs anyway. You might as well draft a handcuff receiver, because if either of those guys go down, Pearsall's going to be on the field all the time. And he is so well developed already as a route runner, as just an overall technician. I think he could hit the ground running if he's given that opportunity. He just needs that opportunity. And I think the only way he gets it is if somebody gets hurt, unfortunately. But if somebody gets hurt, he could be a very, very valuable asset.
And they love him.
Oh, they adore him.
In San Francisco. The system fit with the player here, and we'll talk a little bit more about this when we get to the draft, which is coming up, is as strong as there is in the league. Kyle talked glowingly about Ricky Pearsall post-draft and which particular qualities he loved about Ricky Pearsall and why he wanted him so early in the draft. And the one that he mentioned that made perfect sense as soon as he said it, but I hadn't thought of it in those terms before, was contact courage.
Oh, he is completely willing to take ludicrous, vicious contact. There's very few receivers in this class or any class that is more willing to get hit over the middle. Like, that's not just courage. That is insanity.
Completely. And when Kyle phrased it that way and how important that is for his offense and the windows that they are not creating for Brock Purdy, I was like, yes. And Ricky Pearsall has it, like, buckets of it, as much as any receiver in this draft or the last few. So as soon as he said that, like, that was one of the strongest qualities that he wanted, and the fit was so perfect, I was like, nailed it. Like, they got the guy they needed.
He's a psychopath, and I mean that in, like, the highest complimentary way.
He and Brock are going to be like this.
Oh, they're going to be best friends.
Yeah.
Next up on the list, George Kittle. He's going as TE7. That's about appropriate value, but he did finish his TE5 last year in half PPR. Again, we are digging here, folks. There's not a whole lot of value.
It's harder than you think on some teams because, the fantasy football community is incredibly well developed and diverse at this point. It's been around a long time. Everybody's taken as many slices as they are. There's so much really good, intelligent work going on in that space that the idea of a true sleeper or like massively under or overvalued
almost doesn't exist.
It's been legislated out through just volume.
I do think that he could still finish higher than TE7. not that much higher, but hey, if you're trying to get if you're just nickel and dime in the draft and you're trying to get anything, I would say Kittle as an investment at TE7 or TE8. I think you can outperform that. The only real value, like true real value, that I think might exist on the roster is Brock, because he's going right now as QB 13, if I'm reading that correctly. He was QB 6 last year, again while injured. Yep. Theme of the day. Not to talk too much about Brock throughout this entire episode, but I don't anticipate he's going to be QB 13 this year. I do think he's going to be a top 10 quarterback. How high in the top 10, there's a lot of factors that will influence that. But as far as guys that I just feel comfortable with being let's say you're in a 12-man league, a starting caliber quarterback for you and not relegated to like a super flex, like, he'll be like a high-end QB2. As far as somebody who I think is going to be a QB1 that is not being drafted as a QB1, it's Brock Purdy.
I think that's probably the best value slice we're going to get. And I put that in air quotes because, again, all these value slices on this particular team and several others throughout the league that were high offensive performers, again, they're known knowns. People are picking them, like you said at the top of the segment, at appropriate value. So the opportunity to swoop in and steal something from your league mates doesn't really exist. And that might be the biggest small slice there is on this team.
To have the number one running back and number one player overall and TE7 and wide receiver 12 and wide receiver 16 and QB 13 all in the same offense, like, it's just, good God. Yeah. Kind of really hammers home how good this team is. All right. Moving on to March and the offseason. We talked a lot about 2023. Let's talk more about 2024. We're going to start with free agency because this is what hurt a little bit. They had to make some tough decisions and will continue to have to make some tough decisions. But it set themselves up for a very good April. So we'll talk about free agency first, then we'll get into the draft. EJ, lead us through it.
So losses for the 49ers, and as you led off with, all good teams are going to have to make these decisions. You can't keep everybody, especially when you're very successful. Moving on, Tayshaun Gibson, Bear great Tayshaun Gibson, who played so much better in San Francisco.
By the way, for those of you at home playing the drinking game of how many times will EJ mention the Bears in every single episode, we're now over 1.
Drink. So. If you had 0.5, if you had the over on 0.5, you're now winning. Of course, you're going to win every episode if you have over 0.5. Tayshaun Gibson, who played extremely well for the San Francisco 49ers and played 89% of the snaps, no longer with them, is also suspended for the first 6 games, so is contemplating whether or not he's going to come back to the league at all. But San Francisco will miss him a little bit. And then the defensive line turnover is what I really want to focus on. Randy Gregory, Clellan Ferrell, Eric Armstead, Javon Kinlaw, Chase Young, Sebastian Joseph Day, all these guys played somewhat significant roles for the 49ers, some of them more than others. But in the aggregate, that is a lot of snaps. I didn't add it all up because it would have taken a long time. It's a lot of defensive snaps that were very important for this team. We just talked about how much the defensive line sort of stirs the drink for the 49ers. That's a lot of movement for a team to have in an offseason. So when you said at the top, it hurt a little bit, a lot of that pain came from here. Show favorite Charlie Werner, the blocking tight end, moves on to the Falcons. Isaiah Oliver, who again played surprisingly well, insert random defensive back who plays better in San Francisco than he has other places. Isaiah Oliver was that for them last year. He's a Jet now. Those are the main ones. We're going to put all the names on screen, of course, but those are the main ones. And really the main focus for me looking at that list is how much turnover they had in a very good defensive line.
Just defense in general, right? Because it wasn't just up front. Like, again, Gibson and Logan Ryan, that's 2 of your safeties. Isaiah Oliver, that's your nickel. Oren Burks, you got a special teamer / backup linebacker. I'm not saying all these guys are world beaters. Really, the most impactful loss in terms of individual, like, high caliber player is Armstead, obviously, but it's not just losing Armstead. It's losing Armstead and a lot of key depth / role players. It's just tough to replace. But when you have a good team and an expensive team, it's just going to happen.
Always will. Always does. Teams need to make their choices. Again, this is very much the San Francisco 49ers leaning very heavily on, we have a Chris Kasurik. we can rebuild it.
And also we have a John Lynch. Like we can draft really well. We can make, quality signings on the cheap if we need to, which of course brings us to who they did keep around. Not a whole lot of high dollar amount deals other than the one at the top, CMC. Got to pay the guy who keeps food on the table for everybody in the building. That one didn't surprise me a lot, although when that deal came down, the immediate reaction was, okay, well, what are they going to do with Aiyuk? Because everybody kind of earmarked that money for Brandon Aiyuk, but they made it clear, like, CMC is the important one to keep happy here. So that's kind of the only real big money that was spent. Kyle Juszczyk is back once again at $4.5 million. Tight end / fullback extraordinaire, whatever you want to call him. One of the best Swiss Army knives. Honestly, not even just in the NFL, but in the NFL over the last 15 years, I would say Kyle Juszczyk is up there. Colton McKivitz. Be nice, Brett. Be nice, Brett. Be nice, Brett. How do I say this? You know what? I'm just not going to say anything at all. How about that? I'm going to move right past that one.
I've been waiting for this all day, and you're going to short me? Okay.
Colton McKivitz is back. All right. Next one.
Ring the bell.
John Feliciano, who was probably their best guard last year. God, they had a lot of problems at guard, which is why they drafted Dominic Pooney. Feliciano was the only one that I thought was okay. Burford got worked. Banks got really worked, especially in pass pro. Fun fact, their guard, not duo, but trio, if we include Feliciano, gave up over 100 pressures last year. It was a lot. Also, another thing I want to mention of why Brock is so important, their offensive line, other than Trent, was not good. Like, they gave up pressure like crazy. And to have a quarterback like Brock, who's not getting the benefit of play action to slow the rush down, and he's playing behind a bad offensive line, and he stretched the field as much as he did, and like, I'm trying to paint the picture here. Very few quarterbacks could do what Purdy did last year while injured.
And yet, everybody says, oh, anybody could do that in San Francisco. And you're like, no, it's not true.
Put Matt Stafford's geriatric ass behind Colton McKivitz and see how well that goes. Good God. Anyway, moving on. Juwan Jennings, they also brought back at a very reasonable $8 million deal. Third and Juwan is back for another year. One of the unheralded pieces of this team that makes this team work. I'm super happy for him. This was one of the non-negotiables to me. Like, they had to keep Juwan Jennings. I'm happy they did.
You know what Jennings' game reminds me of is a quarterback, as you said earlier on about Jalen Hurts, that's very good at running. Right? You do everything right, and then the quarterback runs. He escapes the pocket, right? Against the 49ers, you do everything right, and Juwan Jennings is there on third down. They throw it at him. He catches it, comes down past the sticks. Like, he's so good at that. He's one of the very best in the league at that. And it always seems to be, it's not every third down. It's not the way they convert everything.
It's the ones that matter,
It's
though.
just the big ones. It's just the high leverage ones. And you're like, cover Juwan Jennings. They're going to Jennings. Everybody in the stadium knows it, including the opposing defensive coordinator. They do it, and he wins anyways.
3rd and 8 in the 4th quarter. You know what's coming. You just can't stop it.
Nope.
It's going to happen 3 times a game, but it's going to be really, really important. And that's worth $8 million to me. So.
Correct. It's not about volume. It's about impact.
Yes, 100%. In fact, I wonder what his individual EPA per play added to this team is relative to everybody else. It's probably pretty far up there.
I bet.
Anyway, third-party additions. Again, not a whole lot of big money spent here as well because they couldn't. They can, but again, they can't. But they can, but they can't. So they kind of maxed out at $11.5 million for Malik Collins as their quote-unquote big spend outside the building. He's going to, again, be Chris Kosurik's project this year to get Pro Bowl caliber production out of a mid-tier salary, which if anybody can do it, it's Chris Kosurik. $10 million for Leonard Floyd. He, like KJ Wright, is would you call him a hybrid player? Because he's an edge rusher, he's a linebacker, he drops in coverage, he rushes the pass, he does kind of everything. And I kind of feel like if there's anybody who should be coaching Leonard Floyd, it's KJ Wright because they do a lot of similar things very well. going forward and going backwards, I kind of feel like he's going to play that type of role for them.
I don't know. Do I have to turn in a card here because Leonard Floyd played for the Bears? So if I'm going to talk,
Oh
about
no,
him,
this counts. I think we're at 2.5 now. So
yeah, but I was drawn into this. No, Leonard Floyd, a player that I did a pretty deep draft profile on when he was coming out of Georgia. And I said, look, if you're looking for high sack numbers, he might not be your guy. But if you're looking for lots of everything else, he will have sack numbers. He plays the rush much better than people gave him credit for. Again, I think it's always come down to his build. But yes, do it all. People say jack of all trades. Flexible piece in the defense that's very, very useful given a defensive coordinator who understands that role and is using it correctly, I'll say, and not just somebody who's like, we signed Leonard Floyd, we gave him $10 million. He needs to come up with 9 sacks or else. You can do all the other things because he has great length. He has great mobility off the edge. He's really good in the short passing game. He's got a feel for that, especially out towards the sidelines, not so much dropping back in depth. Very good at stringing out the rush, very good at stringing out the rush by proxy that's actually a bubble screen or whatever else. He can do all those things for you, just like the Kyle Van Noys of the world. And if you use him in that role, he's been very good on multiple teams doing that. If you're bringing him in and you're just saying he needs to be a sack threat or else, you're never really going to be that thrilled with him.
he's 32 now, and I feel like he's been this since he was 22.
Correct.
Which is just solid, all-around player who's going to do the dirty work on defense.
I think people's understanding and acceptance of his game has come around to his game. To your point, his game has been the same, and it was very good as long as you understood it. But I feel like more people have come to understand it and accept it over time, and he's just like, been here the whole time, folks, doing the same stuff. It's valuable.
Trent Taylor was also brought back to the 49ers. He was actually drafted in Lynch and Shanahan's first year with the Niners back in 2017. So coming home again, he's carved out a nice little 8-year career for himself. That's nice for him. Devondre Campbell brought in to presumably play in, or not in front of, but instead of Dre Greenlaw, while Greenlaw's probably going to start the year on the PUP list because of that Achilles. So they needed some linebacker depth, like really badly. So you throw Campbell in there, he can start until Dre's ready to go. Honestly, they don't really need Greenlaw until the back half of the year anyway. So they can just let him get healthy, buy some time, give him like a 6-week spin-up period, going into the playoffs, give him some snaps here and there, just get him ready. Like they need Greenlaw for January. They don't need him for September. Like Devondre Campbell's there for September. So great signing for them. Again, $5 million, pretty good deal. And then one last notable signing I want to bring up is Josh Dobbs to be the backup to Brock Purdy. We had a little fun with Dobbs mania, or Dobbs sanity, as some people said last year. He's not a starting quarterback, at least not a long-term starting quarterback in the NFL. But if Brock, knock on wood, goes down for whatever reason, you could throw Dobbs in there. You'll still be competitive with him until Brock comes back. Like, that much is clear. You can win games with him. He's not as good as Purdy. I don't know if he ever will be as good as Purdy, especially at this point in his career. But as far as reliable veteran backups who you can win some games with and who's going to do his part to get Brock ready week after week, which is the job of a backup quarterback to a top 10 quarterback, is just get the main guy ready. I think Dobbs is a good pickup for that role.
And always going to be ready on almost no reps.
Yes.
You can toss him in
and sometimes
there.
Fresh off a plane.
That's correct. And is still going to give you a performance that is acceptable, worthy, and can put you in a winning position, which is a really important role in modern NFL because we saw 70-plus quarterbacks get starts in the NFL last year.
I can't remember the exact number. It might have been like 73. Either way, it was more than 64. So on average, you're more than 2 per team. And, of course, the Niners have seen what life was like without Purdy on the field when he got hurt in the NFC Championship a couple years ago, or rather when like 3 quarterbacks went down a couple years ago. And, you're only as good as your next quarterback up. And Josh Dobbs is a pretty good one there. All right, moving on from March, that brings us to April. Really, really fun draft. I was not a huge fan of their draft last year for various reasons. This year's class, though, totally different story. I absolutely adored this class. I thought they knocked it out of the park. They filled a lot of needs while not overspending to fill those needs. Like, I thought they got appropriate values for their guys while also getting a bunch of immediate key impact starters / contributors. Absolutely love this class.
Top 6, crushed it in terms of player to organization fit, as good as any team did it this year in the draft, period. And if you're talking about the top 6 in a draft being great, you're talking about a great draft. After that, it's just dealer's choice. So Ricky Pearsall, the wide receiver from Florida, we've talked extensively about him. He was the pick, first round, 31st overall. Great fit, great player. Love this player. Was extremely high on him throughout the pre-draft process. Love the fit. Nothing but good things to say about Ricky Pearsall. Renardo Green, cornerback from Florida State.
Guy.
We talked to Renardo at Shrine Bowl. We had an excellent interview with him. We both came away impressed. Extremely long, physical man corner who we both thought would be a really good value anytime after the end of the second round. Niners get him in the second round at 64, right at that mark. I would say as early as I was comfortable, but as soon as I heard where he was going, I was like, nailed it.
Honestly, I could have seen him going in the back half of the first. Like, I truly, I mean, that was how high I was on Renardo, that if they took him at the pick where they took Pearsall, I would have been like, cool, I'm fine with it. You know,
if
like
they took him at the pick where they took Pearsall, I still would have been like, okay, higher than I was on him, but I love the fit, so I love the match. At the end of the second round, because he would not have been there at the end of the third round, this is, again, first one, loved it. Second one, oh, really loved it. That's great. Then Dominic Pooney, the guard out of Kansas, who I was really high on, labeled as a guard, played some tackle, could play center, super versatile lineman, really like his game. They get him in the third round at 86. They needed help.
I think he's going to start.
I think he is too.
And not because, well, yes, because. So let me two reasons here.
Okay.
Two separate lines of thinking. I love Pooney a lot. Had a big grade on him. He was in my tier 2 of interior offensive linemen, which I think tier 1 was only like 4 names or something like that, and then he was right after it. To get him at 86, I thought was a value in and of itself. I thought he easily could have gone, late 2, around where they got Renardo. If Pooney came off the board there, I would have been like, okay, yeah, cool. The thing that really sticks out for him is his unreal ability to mirror. Like, if you're looking at some of the top tackles in this class, Troy Fautanu, Olu Fashanu, I would even say Joe Alt. Like, the thing that really sets them apart is their ability to change directions and mirror rushers that are just throwing crazy ass moves at them and trying to string together counters. Like, it's not just about getting to your landmarks. It's also about your ability to get back inside and then get back outside and really just mirror and keep your body in between the rusher and the quarterback. Pooney was one of the 5 best mirrorers in this entire class. Mm-hmm. And to get him at 86, and I think he's going to play guard instead of tackle, but to get him at 86, I thought was tremendous. I think he's going to start over Banks because Banks was ass last year, and Burford wasn't much better. In fact, you could argue Burford was worse. Like I said, Feliciano was their best guard, and even Feliciano himself we're okay, like we're managing, but like they don't have a high quality guard in the roster. I think Pooney can be a high quality guard and quickly. I think Banks is competing for his job right now. I really do think the rookie might take it.
So first pick, loved it. Second pick, fits perfect. Third pick, value, need, flexibility. They're just crushing it. This is what I'm talking about, folks, going from the top to the bottom of this draft. And then Malik Mustafa, who had much higher grades on a lot of analyst boards than he did on sort of more general boards. I think he really picked up steam in the process as why aren't more people talking about him and his ability? Again, goes to Daniel Bullock's secondary, has a lot of skills that they've used really well in the past, extremely rangy, hits like crazy from depth. Perfect fit for San Francisco. Again, they get 2 high quality, I would say starting quality secondary players within the first four picks of the draft. John Lynch was crushing it at this point.
And then Garendo on top of that, who was one of my favorite running backs in this class, and also somebody who, when we were at Shrine Bowl, like literally at Shrine Bowl in January, I tweeted out, like, this is the guy. Like, if you run this style of offense, this Shanahan style, McDaniel style, wide zone offense, like, this is the one. And then, of course, they ended up taking him as Kyle Shanahan's mid-round running back that he can't lay off every single draft. But as far as, like, opportunity goes for playing time, I think he's got a better shot than a lot of the other running backs that this team has taken in recent years.
So both of those picks in the fourth round, Mustafa at 124, Garendo at 129, and then they have another fourth round pick, and this is the 6th overall pick of the draft where I really was still online. Jacob Cowing, the diminutive but extremely effective wide receiver from Arizona, they get at 135. So this is on John Lynch and the organization for amassing all these fourth round picks, and then they get Mustafa, Garendo, and Cowing before that shelf of the draft where the talent really dropped off. Cowing he's a lot of fun, Niners fans. If you haven't watched his Arizona tape, do yourself a favor. It is a good popcorn watch. Go watch Jacob Cowing win in a lot of different ways. Extremely quick, great separator, good hands, tracks the ball extremely well down the sideline. Very, very effective player. Not sure how many reps he's going to get. We talked about that with Pearsall way at the top. Cowing, I'm not sure. I know when he gets on the field, it's going to be fun.
And then to round it off with Jarrett Kingston in the 6th round, which I know USC offensive lineman, everybody saw Caleb get absolutely thrashed last year. And they're like, well, USC doesn't have any offensive linemen. Jarrett Kingston is a freak, all right, as far as athletic testing goes. And hell, we saw him live at the pro day at USC, like 10 minutes down the road from here. Because we're filming this in downtown LA, if you don't recognize the skyline behind us. But we rolled down to the USC pro day, and we're watching him go through the drills. I was like, who the hell is that? Who is that freaky kid with the piston feet? And then, of course, it was Jarrett Kingston, which then caused me to go do more work on him and just see the tools that he's working with. I get it. USC's offensive line was a mess as a unit last year. I would say their problems were not really Kingston's fault. This is a really, really freaky prospect with a ton of upside. I think he's going to make the roster.
Especially with what you've said about the guard situation, which is completely true. They finish out the draft, 7th round, pick 251, Tatum Bethune, linebacker out of Florida State. As an overall effort, this was one of the best in the NFL.
I would say top 7 or 8 drafts in the league in terms of overall hauls. I actually think we had them on our list too in like our favorite post-draft classes, right?
It's hard not to when you're looking at top talent, which is what's going to define a draft. It's great if you grab gems later down and they outperform. I mean, this is a team that got Dre Greenlaw down the board, who I was a big fan of, but they turned him into something that was even greater than what I thought he could be. It's great when you get those players, and it's extremely valuable to your organization, but you got to hit your top picks. They have to line up. They have to play soon. They have to be contributors. And the more of those you get that work out, the better your roster will be over time. In terms of early returns, we won't know anything for 3 years about this draft class. We never do. In terms of early returns, how we think they're going to fit, path to playing time, scheme, mesh, home run effort.
In terms of their UDFA haul, a bunch of names that we think have a shot of at least hitting the practice squad. The roster's tough to crack because the roster's good, but practice squad, probably, yes, a few of these guys will make it. Tanner Mordecai, quarterback out of OU/SMU/Wisconsin. He's probably going to be a camp arm and then stash him on the practice squad. He played in college football so long that he backed up not only Jalen Hurts, but he also backed up Kyler Murray the year before that at OU. So he's been around a while, folks. He had a whole pre-COVID career and a post-COVID career. He's up there, but I wish him luck. Again, I don't think he's going to make the roster, but he'll probably make the practice squad. Corey Schrader, I think on some other teams he could have made the final 53, but on the Niners specifically, in that running back room, again, he's probably a practice squad guy. Not that he's not talented, but that is just a tough nut to crack. Maybe he'll get, plucked during the preseason if he shows out, which is what preseason's for, right? And I'm sure his agent was talking with him of like, hey, go to the Niners because you're going to get a bunch of work in August. Show what you can do in a system that is probably going to highlight your skill set really well, and then see if you can stick somewhere else. Mason Pline, tight end out of Furman. Broken record here. Probably not going to crack the roster because they have a really good tight end room, but likely will be on the practice squad. Drake Nugent, the center out of Michigan, maybe has an outside shot, but it's an outside shot of cracking the roster. Evan Anderson, this is the one that I actually think has the best shot of truly making it, just because they lost so many guys in their interior defensive line rotation. As far as somebody who could play either a shade or a 3 technique, he's, what's the word? Rotund?
He's a stump as a run defender.
But not slow.
Nope.
Very athletic, fun player to watch. Again, has positional versatility within that cone of interior defensive linemen. He can put him at multiple spots. I think he has the best shot out of any of these guys to stick on the final 53.
Schrader's my pick in terms of system fit, but as you said, there's a lot of talent in front of him in the running back room, but stop me if you've heard this one before. Missouri running back is really good at outside zone. I got to Schrader later in the process, was really impressed with his career at Missouri after he got there, and again, added him to the sort of card file list of like, oh, these players would work really well for Kyle, for Mike McDaniel, for teams that run this system. Sure enough, he ends up there as a UDFA. And then Drake Nugent is, again, stop me if you've heard this, versatile Michigan offensive lineman, either lowly drafted or undrafted, plays their way into the rotation.
They had like 4 of those just this year.
And then can't be displaced, right? So might not get on the field right away, might not even get on the field for the 49ers. It might be another team. I'm telling you, once Nugent gets on the field, he's going to be one of those guys that plays like 5 or 6 years really well, outplays his UDFA status, and everybody goes, huh? And I'm like, what do you mean, huh? It happens seemingly every time.
With everything that we've talked about today, going through April, going through March, going through what happened last year, going through the scheme nuances, going through the treacherous waters of the Brandon Aiyuk contract talk. Hopefully we got out of that one okay. That does bring us to our final segment. Segments, plural, where we talk about, did this team get better? Did they get worse? Did they stay the same? What's their ceiling? What's their floor? And are they going to win the division? We'll start off with the first question. Did they get better? We answer this with either a thumbs up, a thumbs down, or a thumbs even. This one was one of the hardest and might be the hardest in the entire series in terms of determining, did a Super Bowl contender get better? Even after losing Armstead, even after, some of the overall losses that they've had so far, or maybe are yet to have. Because we still don't know what's going to happen with Debo and Aiyuk. There might be some movement before camp after this is recorded. Again, this is July 8th. Did they get better? I started off my answer at thumbs even because I was like, nah, I can't go up on a Super Bowl contending team. But the more I dug into it, and I looked at the draft, and I looked at the holes that they did patch cheaply in free agency, I eventually came around to a thumbs up. Not a reluctant thumbs up, more of a nervous thumbs up, because it's so hard for me to look at a team that was seconds away from winning the whole damn thing and saying, oh, they're better. It's like, oh, this team that had more All-Pros than anybody is better. But at the same time, I couldn't in good conscience say that they're the same because I loved their offseason so much.
And it's not about how the team's going to do. That's the next segment of ceiling and floor. This is about how we feel they answered the questions that they needed to, that I don't even want to say plagued them, that bothered them a little bit last year. Like, where did they put the emphasis for the folks they lost, the folks they added? Like, did they answer the questions that we want them to answer to start off on paper as a better team? And I came to the same conclusion you did, that it is a very thin slice of up. And again, that doesn't mean this team's going to do better than last year's team. Very hard to do that. They were one of the 2 finalists in the league for the title. It's about, how is this team composed and constructed, and do we feel like they are better suited to approach the things that kept them out of the top spot last year? And my response is, yeah, a little bit.
I mean, hell, if they just had better guard play to block Chris Jones even a little bit, they might have won it last year.
Maybe.
They might have better guard play this year. Who knew? Everything would come down to, is your left guard a trash can or not? Like, sometimes
Offensive
Super
linemen,
Bowls are won and lost with on just that.
offensive linemen everywhere right now are like, I knew.
All right, ceiling and floor. This is, again, a tough one because they only won 12 last year. Mm-hmm. How high do you really want to go with it? I thought about maybe going up to 14 because I did say that, okay, they are slightly better than last year. But I resolved to just go with 13. It's still a bump of 1 game over what they did last year, so I'm going to go with a ceiling of 13. The floor is really what tells you how good this team is. My floor for them is 10. Reminder, this is assuming quarterback health. But if Brock Purdy is healthy, I cannot see this team winning less than 10 games. I would be stunned, like beyond stunned, if they're not a double-digit type team that wins the division, which, by the way, I am picking them to win the division. I assume you are too. I would be stunned if they don't win the division, if they're not in contention for the first seed in the NFC, if the playoffs are not running through San Francisco, and if we're not seeing them again in New Orleans in February, trying, hopefully, to finally beat the Chiefs in the Super Bowl. But anything short of that, I think, would be underselling them.
I would agree. This is one of my narrowest windows of the entire series. I'm going to say 12 wins because the NFL is a very tough place to play. This is one of the best rosters in the NFL, and they are one of the best coached, most well-prepared teams week to week in the NFL, which is why they've had all the success, I'll say sustained success, over the last 3 years that they've had. You don't get that by accident. You don't get that off one player. You don't keep that streak going unless you have a very steady, good supply of players that are well coached and prepared for Sundays. And the 49ers have all of that, which is why they're so tough. That being said, the NFL is still a very tough place to play. The ball is not round. It bounces funny ways. People get injured. Bad decisions get made. 12 wins doesn't mean that I don't think that they won't be the best team in the NFC. I think they might be. Not necessarily in terms of wins, but I think they're still the best team in the NFC. And my floor is the same as yours. Regardless of what happens, this feels like a double-digit win football team to me. So that gives me a 12 ceiling and a 10 floor, a very narrow slice. But all the things you said about them, winning the division, yes. Being in contention at the end of the year, yes. Possibly vying for the Super Bowl again as a realistic option, yes. Those are incredibly hard marks to repeat in the NFL, and I think this team can do it.
There are very few teams that I think can stop them along the way. Not that the NFC is completely toothless. Like, there are some really good teams in the NFC. We've spent this whole series talking about many of them. But other than Detroit, Philly, do I want to be bold and say Green Bay? Maybe Green Bay. And probably the Rams. Maybe things get crazy with Seattle. I don't know.
Maybe.
I'm still not giving up on Seattle.
Right.
But it's a very, very small group of teams that I think can realistically challenge San Francisco. They're too deep. They have too much star power. Their quarterback's too good. Their coach is too good. And I'll tell you what, if they run through the NFC West schedule and they come out on top in the NFC West, which is a very good division, I'm probably going to favor them all the way through the playoffs. Even as much as I like Detroit, even as much as I think Green Bay is going to be really good this year. And who knows, Chicago's pretty plucky. What are we at? Over 3, I think, now for Bears?
That doesn't count. I didn't say it.
You were thinking it.
I didn't say it. I was not, actually. I'm not one of those quite yet. We'll talk about that when we get there.
But I just, man, I feel like I would be really stupid if I picked against them again this year like I did last year.
I think that's true. Trust me, I live in the Northwest. I hear it. Oh, Coleman gonna pick us? Coleman gonna pick the Niners again?
Yes.
Yep, so am I. There's no reason not to. Again, this is not a team that like rocketed up from the depths last year and we're like, no, they're going to keep it going. It's a team that's been there each of the last 3 years, right at the top, and it didn't feel lucky at all any time in the past 3 years. It felt like, it's
almost felt like destined.
Yeah, like predetermined. And if you're betting against that, folks, that's on you.
And we don't mean predetermined as in like
scripted. No, we just mean fated from like.
If a script writer wrote Kyle losing another Super Bowl like that for the third time in a decade, they're just an asshole. Okay, like there's no way anybody has that little empathy for another human that they would write Kyle losing.
Oh, I don't know. There's some Hawks fans that definitely have that little empathy for another human.
Thank God is a Seahawks fan at this point because it's rough out here for Kyle. We got to get him a ring at some point. This is just getting hard.
He'll just keep knocking on the door. I have no doubt that he will get one eventually because, again, he is. People say you make your own luck, and he has been making his own luck for a long time now. A lot of things that have been attributed to circumstance or like, no, it isn't. Like you chronicled it earlier in the pod. Look back. Look at Washington. Look at Atlanta. Look at the time early with the Niners. Look at the most recent time with the Niners. Like it's the same stuff. It's consistently top tier offensive play in the NFL over and over and over again. Different players, different systems, different responsibilities with him as a coach, right? The result is the same.
The man got Matt Schaub to lead the league in passing. All right. As far as I'm concerned, he's a wizard.
Just saying.
All right, we're going to get out of here. Niners fans, I know this is a very long episode. I hope you enjoyed it. I don't know how much we're going to be talking about you in the first half of the season because we have a policy here on Bootleg that we like to talk about all 32 teams, and we know we're going to be talking about you a lot in the second half of the season because you're going to be really good and relevant. So we're going to try to, hit some of the other teams probably in September and October. So consider this your fill until we get to November, and it's like, all right, we should probably hit the Niners.
Now's
again.
the time.
Yeah, now's the time because we're going to talk about them for 3 months straight in the back half of the year. But either way, hope you guys enjoyed this show. Thank you once again to Underdog for sponsoring this entire series. Again, if you want to capitalize on Brock Purdy's number being at 3,900 yards for the year and touchdown totals being at 28.5, feel free to hit that at the link in the description or at the QR code on the screen. Thank you once again to Homage, our clothing partner. EJ's wearing a bootleg shirt from Homage right now. So if you want to get Niners gear or you want to get any other NFL gear or bootleg gear, again, the other QR code on the screen or the link in the description, we get a cut of literally anything you buy. Thank you also to our patrons, especially our executive producer tier. Couldn't make this series without you guys as well. EJ recently calculated all the money that you guys have supported us with over the years, and it was staggering. And we got to send you guys something nice again to repay all the support you guys have given us because it's just been incredible.
It's a humbling total. So
it's ridiculous.
When we say we appreciate you all, we mean it.
We would not be able to do this without you guys, truly. So thank you once again. And with that, we're going to get out of here, reset, be back next week for the AFC North. See you then.